So welcome to this evening's presentation of Breaking the Halo, Empowering Students in Outdoor Education. My name on all the official papers is Katja Hurt, but I'm more commonly known as Katja, Kat, or Hey You, if that's a little too complicated. And I will be taking us through this presentation tonight. What's a little bit different about tonight, and I just want to take one moment to acknowledge this, is this presentation draws on a lot of learning and information on avalanches. And if you've been aware of the outdoor news lately, we've had an extremely high amount across the country of avalanche fatalities in the last couple weeks. And I want to be mindful that even right now, there could be things impacting people and avalanches could be a trigger. So if that is the case for you, you are just be knowledgeable of that. If you're welcome to step out, if something about avalanches is going to trigger you, I just know that's a very sensitive topic right now for a lot of people in our outdoor community. With that in mind, we're going to go forward. This will be a learning opportunity, I hope, and a good positive discussion, and hopefully nothing too heavy for anyone. But we're here to support you if any of this is a trigger or you want to talk afterwards. I'll stick around. So just a quick overview of who I am. If you start kind of left to right, on the left, I've been a ski patroller for 14 years up at Snoqualmie Pass primarily, and I do a lot of instructing with the new ski patrollers, some mentoring, some guiding, some talking about, new skills on and off the snow. On the middle, I'm getting to be more and more known for my volunteer work as a chaplain with police, fire, and emergency services. So that's where I do like spiritual, emotional, kind of the softer side of care in trauma and accidents. So that's something that I bring to my instructing and my presentations is kind of that awareness of what goes into kind of the inner elements of a person, not just their hard skills. And then on the far right, you can see two images of me doing some of my outdoor stuff. There's me in basic climbing, learning to use a rope, and that was not that long ago. So don't go into this presentation thinking I'm some superhero athlete climber. I'm just like many of you, fairly new to this, still learning, figuring things out, and using the Mountaineers to do it. And then that bottom picture is one I use to keep myself humble. I've grown up with parents who kayak. I love water sports. And yet to this day, I still struggle every time I have to get back in a boat. So I like images like that of me being coached once again to get back in my kayak because it reminds me that we're all learning and none of us are perfect. So that's a little bit about me, kind of gives you a glimpse of my interests, my kind of activities in life, and some of my outdoor background. And I'll use that as an invitation to immediately start into a breakout session. So this will be a group you're going to be in later tonight to have kind of a little bit longer 10-minute discussion, but we want to give you a chance to see who's in your group first. So in a moment, Sarah will break you out into some small groups. And when you're in that group, follow these prompts if you want, or come up with your own, but a very easy way to get to know each other is share your name, your pronouns, your location, and what activities you'd like to do. So for example, I'm Katja Hurt, my pronouns are she, her. I'm located in Lacey, Washington, which is near Olympia, south of Seattle. And I like to do water activities, mountaineering, climbing, hiking, scrambling. I think the only thing I don't do is scuba diving. So, well, yet at least. So there's my intro. So Sarah, if you'll break them into groups, when you get to your groups, turn on your camera, unmute your mic, and do a short intro. Let each other know who you are, and that'll be the warm-up for the later discussion. All right, welcome back. I hope those who were able to get into breakout rooms were able to meet their fellow participants, and those who weren't, I think we troubleshooted it or figured it out, so we're good. All right, so you know a little bit about me, you know who you're going to be talking to in a bit. Let's dive into the content. So why is this presentation given? It's given because there are things that go wrong, and unfortunately, these happen enough that there's publications about them. And this is just an example of one that I was personally connected to, and now you can look and read in the Accidents in Mountaineering, like this 1 or 2 page write-up on some very technical details on an anchor failure, and that led to a tragedy. What you don't see in the write-ups about accidents is that sometimes there's a lot of elements that happen like dominoes way beforehand. And something that I started to question is, can any of that be better prevented? Is there another approach to trying to teach safety, trying to teach risk management, trying to make people safer so we prevent these accidents from happening. Because once it's happened and you read this write-up, you learn some technical details, you learn some good facts, but what does it really do for those who are new, who maybe aren't at that level to be analyzing accidents yet? Like, how can we make the beginners safer, the people who are still learning, who are still kind of oriented to give me information, I'm not really analyzing yet. So that's kind of the background of why this program is offered specifically tonight to students and beginners, but it's open to everyone. So it's called Breaking the Halo, and I'm going to explain why and kind of tie into that idea that there's these things that lead into maybe preventable things before accidents happen. So why halo? What is a halo? Let's make sure we're all on the same page. So you can see the image. It's a person with wings and a halo, the object over their head. So traditionally, a halo is understood as some kind of angelic or kind of religious symbol of holiness or goodness or omniscience. It's usually attributed with good, powerful, like holy things. So that's the literal definition of a halo. The halo in the context that we're going to look at tonight comes from two places. One is about 100 years ago, when a researcher named Edward Thorndike went and started researching military folks and looking at patterns and how are decisions made and just kind of doing some general studies. And something he noticed is what we would call first impressions. He noticed that when senior military folks or officers or trainers would form first impressions of brand new soldiers, those first impressions would have a lot of power and would carry forward into that soldier's career. So for example, if you think about it as, all right, I'm this senior leader person, I'm going to be looking at all these brand new soldiers for the first time, and I see them all lined up in a row, and my first impression could be formed by anything. It could be that I like that person's haircut, it could be their uniform is really crisp, it could be they're from the same place I'm from, it could be they're really respectful, they appear like they have their act together. For whatever reason, you see them, you have this good first impression of them, and then that kind of carries forward. And what Thorndike noticed, and it was so prevalent that he published on this and it became a term, the halo effect, is that those first impressions are so powerful that it can actually blind you to the truth about someone. So maybe your first impression was this person is great, and now in the future, every time you look at them and you're evaluating them for something else, you have that bias that they're great. And that halo of like, oh, they're so good, they're so perfect, once it's been put on them for whatever reason, it carries forward and it can make you overlook things that maybe are negative or maybe don't match that halo perfect image. So the halo effect is kind of a negative thing in that sense. It's saying that your first impression can blind you from seeing problems or deficiencies later on. And we've known about this for over 100 years because of the research by people like Thorndike. Well, fast forward to current times. And in the last couple years, there's a Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School instructor, Ian McCammon, and he has done a lot of work on avalanche and winter safety. And McCammon looked at how every year, like as is happening even right now, there are avalanche-related fatalities. Even though we know so much science about avalanches, we can dig avalanche pits. We can look at layers in the snow. We know how avalanches form. We know what causes them. We know the terrain they're likely to happen on. We know where you shouldn't be when an avalanche happens. We know the conditions that are right for them. We know so much about avalanches, yet people keep dying in avalanches. And McCammon was like, what is going on with this? So he looked at like 30 years of data. And what McCammon found is that in avalanches, there's a whole bunch of, in the fatalities, there's a whole bunch of kind of critical errors that lead up to most avalanche fatalities. And among them, you can read about these, they're published, and I think they're covered I saw them covered in the Mountaineers magazine recently, actually. Some of these are very familiar, some are kind of out there, but the one that I really noticed is the expert halo. And what McCammon found is that, unfortunately, in lots of avalanche fatalities where there were survivors who could report what had happened beforehand and after, they found that in a lot of groups going into the backcountry in the winter, there'd be a leader, someone literally leading the group, or someone making the decisions or who organized the group. And people would look to that leader and follow them and do what they said. And because that's the expert, they know the route, they made the plans, they have all this experience. Like, I'm going to do what they say because we're in this risky environment and they know what to do to keep me safe. So I'm going to do what they say. And McCammon found that's one of the errors, is that people would go out there and have a bad feeling about something or would wonder about something, but they wouldn't speak up because they saw this expert, this leader, this person with this halo as they're the one who knows everything. Why should I speak up? And McCammon published that that's one of the problems, is people don't speak up because they're afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of contradicting the leader. They don't want to insult that expert. And so that essentially puts a halo on that person's head saying, oh, you're so up there, so above me, I can't approach you. And hopefully most of us hearing that realize that's a problem. You should always be able to speak up. So that's the background of this idea of halos. And that's how I knew about them, from avalanche work, from reading some of the research. Okay, halo, it's a bad thing. It shows up on a person's head. You look at them with reverence and you don't speak up. That's a bit of a problem. Well, as I started thinking more and more about what goes into decision-making and risk management and safety in the outdoors, I started to realize these halos aren't just on an expert. They aren't just on someone we're looking up to. These halos can appear on all kinds of people, on all kinds of things, in all kinds of places. And I started running with this idea of, what else are we blind to? What are we making mistakes about? What are we not seeing correctly? And that led to what I eventually kind of scribbled in notepads and all over the place, to an examples of 6 primary halos. So I'd like to go through those with you. And why is this important before we dive in? It's important because the things I'm talking about, bias, mistakes, assumptions, avalanche, fatality causes, you look at these 2 documents, these are examples of something that a military group has used to talk about different biases, and an example of an article covering the human factors in avalanche accidents. There's a lot of data out there and it's overwhelming. I've been a ski patroller for 14 years. I know that McCammon published a list of at least 6 causes of avalanche fatalities, and to this day, I cannot list them. I know one of them is the expert halo, and I know others have something to do with fresh tracks and new terrain and excitement, but I can't list them. And I get caught up because I feel stupid. I feel like I should be able to list them. And the idea with the halos is, how about we stop worrying about these proper terms and these big lists of things? How about we go to some really simple common grounds that we can all understand and just use the term halo, for example. And once we understand and can talk about those, then we can start studying these longer lists and kind of increase our knowledge. But we need a simpler place to start at so we can all have a conversation and understand what we're talking about. So that's why I chose halos, and that's why I teach this. So what do you need to know? You need to know that halos exist, and you need to know how to recognize them, how to look for them, how to talk about them. So that's what we're going to dive into. And I'll explain this image in a bit. You'll see it again. Hopefully for those, everyone can see it, but for those who can't, it is a illustration of a mountain goat smashing a halo under its hoof. So one of the first halos that I started noticing is this leader halo. So it's both a tribute to the work of Edward Thorndike and McCammon and looking at the work they've done with the expert halo. But it's also more than that, because what I started to learn, especially when I got involved with outdoor groups and ski patrol and the mountaineers and all these different places where people come together to do something they love, is that leaders are not always experts. In fact, I remember being in a class once and I referred to one of our instructors as an expert in this, and the instructor freaked out and was like, no, like, I'm just like you, I'm still learning, like, I have things I don't know. And they really didn't like the title expert. So expert halo immediately can cause people to get on the defensive and be like, oh, hey, I don't think I'm an expert. So I was like, okay, there's more to it than just being an expert, right? So where do these halos show up? Well, the leader halo can show up on our instructors, on our course leaders, on the people who are organizing, who have titles of authority. But there's more than that. The leader halo can show up on that person who's in the front of the line. So in this image, you see people on a hike. The person in the front of the line has suddenly become a leader. They are susceptible to that leader halo just because they're in the front of the line. Does that mean that they're even aware that you're looking to them as a leader? Does that mean they have the knowledge and the background and the authority and decision-making skills to be a good leader? I don't know. If we question that, That's great. We have a discussion, we figure it out. But if we just blindly assume that the person in the front of the line knows exactly what's happening and is the perfect leader, we're putting a halo on them, and we're putting ourselves and them at risk of not asking the right questions. Leader halos can also show up on you and me. Think about when you've been in a situation like a class or a meeting or a social situation where you've looked to someone who's a peer, but maybe has a really cool story or more experience than you, or for some reason they stand out above the rest. We can be in a classroom or a group of equals and put a leader halo on someone who we look up to, who we want to be more like, who is better at one thing than the other. It's great to acknowledge people's skills and it's great to seek out peer leaders, but the halo problem is where we've put this halo on them and thought, hey, that person has done more outdoor stuff than me, or hey, I'm a brand new climber, but that person has some climbing experience. I'm going to assume they know more than me. And you put this halo on them and you stop asking critical questions, or you start assuming more about them than you know. That's the risk of the leader halo. It blinds us to the people we're looking up to. It keeps us from asking questions. And sometimes it makes us put our own value down where we should be still seeing ourselves as an equal voice in a conversation. So that's the first halo, is the leader halo. Whether you're an expert or a peer, you can be susceptible to it. The second halo, and this is definitely a tribute to mountaineers and scouts and different groups that many of us are familiar with, is the badge halo. So badges are good. They are valuable. I'm not dissing badges. I'm one of the people that when the Mountaineers says they have a new badge, and I fall victim to April Fools every year, I'm like, oh, there's a new badge. Oh, I'm excited. I want to do it. Why? Because it stands for something. It means I've put in time and effort to learning something new, and I'm getting a badge to show that I took the time to learn something, to demonstrate a skill. I'm proud of the badges I have. Badges, certificates, honor cords at graduations, like certificates of thanks, certificates of merit, whatever you put in the work and earn, those things are pretty cool and they're special, and I'm not going down on those whatsoever. What you do need to be wary of is when we start to not think about what that badge represents and how current it is. So an example that I share with people is I'm a ski patroller. About 15 or 16 years ago, I went through a very intensive course where I had to spend hours and hours and hours studying and practicing and learning how to bandage, splint, transport, you name it, take care of someone who gets hurt on a ski slope and needs to be taken care of, sometimes with very serious life-threatening injuries. I learned a lot, and I studied for hours outside of every class hour because I knew I had to pass an exam and I had to be competent in order to succeed as a ski patroller. Fast forward 15, 16 years. Do you think I put that much time into studying those skills? No. I am pretty good at what I do. I have a lot of practice doing certain things. For example, if you break your arm, I can bandage that, sling it, swath it in my sleep because I do that so often. But there's some things that I haven't really practiced since that first time through the class. There's very specific types of injuries that take very specific types of responses, and I just never experience them. I never see them on the hill. So why would I practice them? And so that's why every year as patrollers, we're required to go through a refresher. We have to show up for at least a full day and practice a new skill set or a different skill set or learn about new rules or best practices. And we have to refresh our skills because the leadership knows that people like me can get kind of rusty. We can forget, we cannot practice something, and that's not good. Now, as a young patroller, I was really resentful. Every freaking year, I have to give up a whole day to practice these skills. Come on, you gave me a certificate. I'm wearing the coat. I know what I'm doing. Well, that was a halo. That was a pretty bad halo. I was putting a halo over that skill set because I was saying this piece of paper that says I passed this course means I'm good to go forever. Oh, that's a bad halo. Because the truth is, once we stop putting that effort in, we stop that studying, we stop testing ourselves, that skill set starts to diminish. It's got a half-life. It breaks down over time. And if we don't rehearse it, we don't practice it, we don't keep studying it, it loses some of the value. But that badge, that piece of paper, that pin, that medal, whatever it is that stands for that skill set or that accomplishment stays there permanently. So the halo comes from assuming it's still current, from assuming the person's practicing, whether it's you or someone else, and that can put people in danger. So badge halo, it's a halo that shows up over a skill set, over an accomplishment, over something that it represents. The other kind of aspect of the badge halo is when we get blinded to each step that we're accomplishing to try and get that badge. So whether you think about it as, hey, you want to be a firefighter, a police officer, a ski patroller, a medic, like whatever you're trying to accomplish, or whether it's you want to climb a certain amount of mountains, you want to do the Rainier 100, you want to do the fire lookout climbs or hikes. Maybe you have a list you're trying to accomplish. At the end of that list or that accomplishment, you get something, a certificate, a pat on the back, like you know you've done it. The halo can also appear if you're just looking at all the steps in that list as steps towards that end goal. You can't lose sight of the fact that every single step has risks and needs your full attention as you go through it, because each step exists by itself as a new mountain, as a new skill you have to use, as a new physical activity that you need to stretch and prepare for. All these steps have to be respected and looked at before you can focus on that end goal. Because otherwise, think about it as trying to complete a certain number of peaks. Think about it as the 7 summits. Oh, I want to climb 7 summits and get that recognition that I've done 7 summits. If you're blind to the fact that each of those 7 summits is a very serious mountain climb that has and can kill people, and like Everest, Mount Everest, people die there all the time. If you get blind to the fact that that is a challenge of itself and has risks and consequences, you might just see it as another stepping stone on the way to the end. And that's a halo too. You have to have absolute respect and awareness of everything along the way in order to safely proceed through and get to that end goal. So there's the leader halo, which goes over the people and the roles we look to with respect and admiration we might elevate too high. And there's the badge halo, which is that end goal, that piece of paper, that certificate, without thinking about what's gone into it, what needs to go into it, or how current is it and what does it stand for. So that's where the first 2 halos can show up. The third halo, and this is one hopefully very familiar to those who like to hike and get outdoors around here, is the cairn halo. So cairns are rock piles that have different traditional uses. Sometimes they're used to mark religious or historical spots. Sometimes they're used as trail markers. Sometimes they are built because someone is bored and wants to take a really cool Instagram picture. Whatever the reason, these rock piles appear. And quick plug for Leave No Trace, if you build one for a picture, please take it down. That's a good Leave No Trace principle. However, if you are on a long backpacking trip, or you are trying to find a climbing route, or you are in some place where the trail is hard to follow, you may see cairns to help you find your way. Don't take those down. They're there for a reason. Thank you. The risk with cairns is when we're following them blindly, whether it's the literal rock pile that we're looking to mark our trail, or any type of trail we're on, a paved trail, a sidewalk, a dirt trail, a goat trail. When you follow a trail without questioning a few things, you can be at risk of halos. So what are some examples of this? Think about when you go off hiking and you're following a dirt trail. Usually at some of the more common hikes, like on the I-90 corridor in the Olympics, you'll see a sign at the trailhead. Usually there's, that stand of information, there's a map, there's beware of bears, there's different mileage charts. There's a lot of information at a trailhead. And so you see that, and then there's a trail, and you think, usually correctly, that's the trail I follow. Well, sometimes there's trails that don't have signs. How do you make sure you're choosing the right one? Or once you start following the one you know is right, if there's a branch or a deviation or some kind of change, how do you know which is the one you're supposed to be on? A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, we just follow it because it feels right or it seems right, or that's where everyone else went, so we should go that way too. The halo appears when we're very unlucky or when we have failed to check our assumptions. This happens if you get into scrambling and climbing. To get to climbing routes or to get off trail to do scrambles, sometimes you follow boot trails or very vague impressions through the undergrowth that you think is a trail, but maybe you're not sure. Usually you get lucky. It's there for a reason. It's because a lot of people are going that way, but sometimes it's because the elk like to go that way. or the goats like to go that way, or someone got bored of the other way and tried to set their own trail and someone else followed them and it left a path through the underbrush. That's risky because not only can you start to follow a trail that goes somewhere completely different, you can get on a trail that then disappears and you can't find your way back. This is also something we see right now with all the winter weather and all the snow. You get out in the snow, you start following, and what do you like to follow when you're in the snow? You like to follow boot tracks because breaking fresh snow is exhausting. Great, you're following boot tracks. Halos appear when you don't question who put those boot tracks there. Do I know where they're going? Do I know that they even know what they're doing with route finding? Like, why are these boot tracks here? Are they going the right way? There are cases where people have gone up into snowy environments and on their way back down have followed boot tracks back down. They thought they were their own, and they've been wrong. It's been someone else who came up behind them and stomped over theirs, and they follow it down to the wrong parking lot, to the wrong trailhead, or to the edge of a cliff. So you got to be really careful and always have a way to check yourself. How do I know I'm on the right trail? How can I double check this? Do I have my map and compass? Do I have GPS? Do I have some sense of navigation? Have I been looking up and thinking about what the landmarks around me? How am I making sure that not only I know where I'm going, but I can get back if I've put a halo here and I'm making a mistake? And then, of course, the plug for search and rescue folks is if you do get off track and you can't figure out where you are, please hold still and let someone come find you. That's a halo too that you can fall susceptible to, is thinking that you know the way out when you're really just guessing. So Cairn halos are the routes we follow. They're the decisions we make with route finding and paths. They're kind of the path, the process, the way we go. And then recapping, leader halo is the people and the people in positions of power. Badge halo is the skill sets and the end goals and the things that may have half-lives that we need to respect. Cairn halos are the routes we take. So where else can we find halos? Well, we can find them on our gear. And this is one that kind of can often get a lot of like, oh, nods of appreciation, or yeah, that sounds familiar, but it's one we can't shrug off. And I divide gear halos into two specific ones because they both merit some very intentional thought. So the first to think about is the backpack halo. And by that, I mean the gear we carry with us, the things we pack for an adventure, the things we have just in general when we go somewhere. So you think about when you show up at the trailhead, you got your backpack on, hopefully you have your 10 essentials, you're ready to go. We all look at what everyone else is carrying. We're looking at what people are getting out of their cars. We look at what they're putting on. We notice if someone's pack is significantly bigger or significantly smaller than ours. It's very common to make observations and draw conclusions from what we see. The halos start to appear in a few different ways when it comes to our gear. First is when you're making those observations and you start drawing conclusions about someone or something based on just what you've seen at first glance. So maybe I see someone showing up with a huge backpack, super full, bulging, and I can make different assumptions. Oh, they are way overpacked. They're going to be such a pain and slow us down. Those are some assumptions I'm making, and that's a halo because I don't know. I don't know what's in that bag. I don't know what that person's background is. I don't know if they're carrying things for the leader. I don't know if they're carrying training weight because this hike is too easy, but I suddenly started making assumptions just based on the size of their pack. And how about when maybe you're sorting through your pack or someone else's, and maybe you have some hand-me-down stuff or some inexpensive stuff, or maybe you bought some things absolutely brand new. We can put judgments on the quality and quantity of gear. In fact, I think I just saw something shared by the Mountaineers on like, when did outdoors become like you have to be so glamorous or have all the perfect stuff or look so good? And it's something that's becoming more of a discussion point now. And it's one that's super important to think about because do you ever get embarrassed by what you carry because of the age or the quality? Or do you feel like your stuff is better than someone else's because it's brand new or it's super expensive? You have to watch out for these assumptions and judgments you make about gear because they're not necessarily accurate. I can be carrying the newest and greatest gear from all the outdoor stores and have never taken it out of the packaging, have no clue how to use it. And if you turn to me in a really bad situation and say, pull out your emergency shelter, we have to protect this person because they're getting hypothermic. If I've never thought about how to assemble the shelter I'm carrying, or I've never even taken it out of the box, how useful is that going to be in that situation? And likewise, if I'm packing my backpack and I see that someone else has all the latest and greatest, and I'm embarrassed and leave stuff of mine behind or pretend I don't have it or bury it down deep because, well, they clearly have the better thing, I don't need to worry. I'm putting a lot of weight on them and this assumption that they're going to be there when I need them or that their thing is going to work better than mine. So you have to check yourself and these assumptions when it comes to gear and how you're viewing other people's gear and your own gear. Now that kind of translates into the helmet halos. So a helmet, also a piece of gear, something that can be used for scrambling, for climbing, for bicycling. We use helmets in a lot of different contexts. Helmets and other safety gear merit their own discussion because safety gear is so important. It is what can get between us and serious injury or even death. And you have to have some respect for not only the abilities, but the limitations of the safety gear you carry. So I call it a helmet halo because something that really stood out to me when I was in the basic climbing class is the poor understanding of what helmets are for from a lot of the students. And at first I was guilty of it too. I knew from skiing, I wear a helmet when I'm skiing, that you wear that helmet because if you fall, it's going to protect you from serious injuries. Well, then I learned, okay, there's different speeds that it does or does not help at, etc. Okay, so it should help you from serious injuries when you're skiing. Got it. I get to climbing and I assume the same. I put on the helmet, I'm going to be fine because it's going to protect me from serious injuries. Halo, because I'm thinking only about head injuries, right? I'm not thinking about the fact that that helmet only covers here. My neck is exposed, my face is exposed, my torso is exposed. This is all soft, fleshy stuff that if it gets smashed into a rock, not going to go so well. And then we have people who put on that helmet and they think, okay, well, great. If I fall, it'll protect me. And they don't think about the fact that a climbing helmet specifically is rated for falling objects. If you didn't know that, surprise, brand new information. And if you did, think about this with other safety gear too. Climbing helmets are specifically designed that when you put them on your head and you go out scrambling or climbing, if things fall from above, like ice, like rocks, like things that are getting knocked down on you, they will bounce off the helmet and not fracture your skull. That is the scientific rating the helmets are based on. They are not rated for taking a pendulum swing and smashing into a cliff. They are not rated for tumbling, losing your balance, and somersaulting down a hill into boulders. That is not what helmets are tested for in the climbing world or intended to protect you from. Yet, how often do we feel safer because we're wearing a helmet or have it with us? So the call to action and the awareness with the helmet halos is to always know what exactly your gear is intended to do, what the science behind it says, and what additional precautions you need to take to protect yourself. Because you can't just assume this helmet is this magical piece of armor that's going to keep you safe. You have to look at it and say, this is what it protects me from, this is what it doesn't, so what am I going to do for those other things? And this applies to all kinds of outdoor sports. You think about if you go kayaking and you put on a life jacket, people feel safer because they put on a life jacket. Well, yeah, that life jacket's going to keep you afloat, but is that life jacket going to keep you alive when you get into frigid waters and you go hypothermic? Nope. People even think about this when they bring their cell phone with them somewhere. Oh, I got my phone. I can call for help or check the GPS and know where I am. Do they think about that cell phone's going to die? Or maybe the GPS or phone won't connect because you're in the middle of nowhere? You make life and death decisions based on safety gear and equipment that sometimes you don't stop and think enough about. And that's where the halo appears. The halo appears in thinking that we're magically protected by something we carry with us, when in reality, there's other risks we have to think about and we can't imbue it with those magical qualities. So recapping, there's halos over people, there's halos over skills and qualifications and experience, there's halos over the routes we follow, and there's halos over our gear, whether it's gear that we carry and might need or gear that we put our trust in our life into. So the final halo, and yes, it's a cute kitty because that's some heavy stuff we've gone over. And I want everyone to be able to breathe a little bit, and kitties are generally cute. But the final halo is, if you notice, this kitty in the picture is looking into a reflection, or is at least next to a reflection. So think about that reflection, the mirror, kind of seeing yourself reflected back at you. The halo in the mirror comes down to each of us, and it's more about kind of ego and checking the assumptions we have about ourselves. The halo in the mirror is when we maybe think we are able to do something that we haven't actually tried yet, or worse, when we tell people we're able to do something, but we know we really can't. That's where that halo appears, is when we present ourselves wrong. The halo in the mirror can also happen when we judge others or put others down or use judgmental language. Think about times when you've been around other people and you've made comments that are judgmental, whether, oh, look at so-and-so, or can you believe what they're doing, or, oh, don't listen to them, they don't know what they're talking about. As soon as you start to make judgmental comments about some other person or some other situation, those comments usually serve to elevate you, don't they? They kind of make you look more knowledgeable. They make you look better. They make it look like and sound like, for some reason, you are the person to be believed, paid attention to, or to credit, and that other thing or person should be discredited or ignored. That is a really bad halo, because not only are you building yourself up in a way that might not be true, but you might be causing others to start discrediting and not listening to and judging others based on something you said. And that's not fair, because every single person, every single experience has its own merit, has value that can be explored. I mean, this is, you think about the current issues with diversity, you think about communication breakdowns, you think about so many of the issues we have in this world that boil down to, how did I present myself? How did I present the other person? And why did I do it? Did my ego get in the way? Was I trying to look good in the moment? And did it cost me by either making people put too much credit on my shoulders that I can't live up to, or by discrediting someone else or something else that maybe does have some merit? And if I had calmed my ego down enough, we could all be sharing that information. So the halo in the mirror is really that need for that self-check. It's to check ourselves, check our assumptions, check our language, and check how we're presenting ourselves and interacting with others. And you know what? It's one of the hardest ones, because we all like attaboys, we like pats on the backs, we like to hear you've done good or you go girl. We like to be affirmed, and it's great to have affirmations. It's great to be known for what you do well. It's just risky, because that halo can appear in an instant when that gets to your head, or it makes your ego push you in directions you maybe shouldn't be going. So you can see listed under the discussion heading on the left the different halos we've been over: leader, badge, Karen, backpack and helmet, mirror, and there's others too. You know, in the beginning I said that some of these lists are exhausting and I can't even remember them. Well, the point isn't for you to memorize all of these. The point is to show you that these halos can appear in all kinds of places over all kinds of things, whether it's a tangible thing or an idea of a thing, whether it's another person or whether it's yourself. Halos can appear anywhere. And halos, hopefully you've seen the theme here, have to do with assumptions, have to do with not thinking things through, have to do with ego. They have to do with these situations where it's less than ideal, or where we're making mistakes, or there's risk showing up. So what we're going to do is go into a second breakout session now. And in the breakout session, it's going to be a little bit longer, about 10 minutes. What I invite you to do with your group is to reflect on what we've been going over. Talk about these halos. Like, is there one that really jumped out to you that you've seen a bunch? Or is there one that you're kind of listening to like, oh, I've never really seen that? And maybe you should ask your group if they've seen it. Take a few minutes to talk about these or other halos you can think of, because it is so important to be able to identify where these complacency issues, these assumptions, these mistakes are happening. That's step one to breaking halos and making this world safer. All right, welcome back, everybody. I want to give about a moment or so to ask, did anything really inspiring or interesting or noteworthy come up in your chat? Is there any question you didn't have unanswered in your breakout discussion chat? Is there something you'd like to share that really was meaningful? I really like to get feedback from folks, because I don't get to go in your little rooms, so I don't get to hear the discussions. But if anyone has anything they'd like to share, I invite you to take a moment, unmute, speak up, put it in the chat. That'd be great.
We talked a bit about the intersection of the leader halo and the badge halo, especially as it relates to the mountaineers. I wrote down one quote. Somebody said, collecting badges feels like creating an identity, which is something the mountaineers sort of heavily encourages. And then when you take some of these classes You're just being taught by people who have these badges, you know, a month before you, 6 months before you, 2 years before you, but they're not actually, you know, they just have a badge. So they're being put in the position of being a leader, but they may not actually have too much more knowledge than you do.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And that definitely makes you start to kind of think more critically then about, okay, so like it's okay to admire and respect people's skills and abilities, but where's the kind of level between, you know, putting too much credit on them? And then also hopefully thinking like that empowers you to speak up, because I know I'm always intimidated when I walk into a classroom. I think like, oh, I need to just be quiet and absorb. And it's not the case. I need to respect that I have knowledge and experience I'm bringing to the table too, and I have the right to speak up because we're all human beings. We're all in this, and like you said, maybe that person's only there because they were in it a few years before me, and now they're giving back. It doesn't mean they're untouchable. It doesn't mean they're unapproachable. So yeah, that's a great thing to point out. I'm glad you guys got to discuss that. Thank you. Another? Hi there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd probably just echo the same sentiment. I noticed maybe badges were a slightly newer thing with the Mountaineers. I joined the Mountaineers 20 years ago, and we have someone who's leading our branch who's brilliant and super applied. And this person has an explosion of badges, but has practically 1.5 years of climbing experience that started with camping, their first camping trip 1.5 years ago. Or I have friends who took the basic course 20 years ago, have one badge on their Mountaineers profile, but have 20 years of weekend climbing and all that experience. And they just, if you didn't know them and they're both on a Mountaineers climb, you'd probably see this old person with one badge and this young person who's a total hotshot. And you probably get the wrong impression.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's something too, even outside of the Mountaineers context, like Scouts, there's kids who are earning badges with skill sets. The military awards a lot of badges and medals. You think like people have certificates of achievement. It's something that can show up all over the place. And yeah, I love you pointed out, you know, the time frames. Maybe this person has been doing this forever and has like the wisdom of the hills, but doesn't represent it. And then maybe this person is a go-getter who has put just tons of recent time and energy into learning all this, but doesn't have that lived experience yet. So that's a really good thing to think about. And, you know, maybe kind of do that questioning, that critical questioning. What do I think about this person and why? And, you know, do I actually know their story? So I'm glad you shared that. Thank you so much. We got time for maybe one more if there's any other thoughts, and then we'll move on. Did any groups have any of the other topics, the Cairn, Gear, Mirror, any other halos that came up? Oh, I see you raised hand. Go ahead.
Hi. Figured since we have a little bit of time, the one that we talked about, or at least I identified the most with, was the gear thing. As you mentioned, it's really interesting with gear getting lighter and there being so many options and more expensive options, and it's definitely a good space to be in if you're a gearhead. But if you are looking to get out and be outside, it could be a huge barrier to almost have that knowledgeability or have somebody that's like, check out my new lightest and the greatest thing that's ever come. Like something that I can think about is just a simple backpack. Somebody might just be using like, you know, a JanSport knapsack from growing up, and that serves the same purpose as a high-tech like Osprey bag. But that's something that we talked a little bit about, especially as we get, you know, more expertise and more experience in these different outdoor spaces. Gear becomes definitely a huge barrier in a lot of different ways, but also a halo, as you were talking about.
That's great. I love that you used the JanSport example, because that was me. Like even up to a few years ago, I feel like I was still using my old school backpack because it still worked. Why wouldn't I? I think the only reason I upgraded is I discovered the more water and weight I carried, the more my back hurt. And so then I finally bought a more official backpack because I hated the backache. But that's such a good example because yeah, you can look down on someone for the bag they're carrying, and it's why do we feel that self-righteous need to judge? Are we thinking about the fact that it's great they're out here and they're doing what they can with what they have? Or maybe their gear has sentimental value. Maybe like that's the backpack their parents took them on their first hike on and they really want to keep carrying it. So cool. Thanks for sharing all that. It's a lot to think about. Great. And we'll continue on, and there'll be time for more just kind of general feedback, question and answers as we go. And at the end, I'm going to share an additional resource. Something I encourage with all of these halos now and moving forward is to get in the habit of those critical thinking questions. If you catch yourself thinking about one of these, kind of question like, why am I thinking that way? Or what have I thought wrong about in the past? And really digging into those critical thinking questions and coming up with like more ways to dive into these and explore them really helps you just get better at recognizing halos and better at having those conversations and recognizing them when they do come up. So where is my clicker? There's my clicker. All right, so back to our mountain goat friends smashing the halo. So we now know these halos exist and we know they can be anywhere. So now what do we do with them? Well, we need to be able to smash them. We need to be like the goat and be able to smash those halos. So that's what we're going to look at for this next part, is some ideas on how to combat these, to break them, to respond to them when we see them. And of course, it's not an exhaustive list, but I hope maybe you get something to take away that you hadn't thought of before, or you have something to contribute that the class can learn from. So how do we break the halo? The themes that have been coming up as we've talked about halos are communication breakdowns, people kind of getting bullied or talked about or pushed around, but then also these themes of complacency and assumptions. So looking at those themes, it's how do we then start to address each one and break it, especially in this kind of outdoor context that we're all in. And I love this image. I think this is a college demonstration, like a protest of some sort. This was years ago, not, recent memory protests have taken on more kind of weight and meaning, and kind of there's more fear with them. But I think this was from a few years ago when it was more and more common, especially on a college campus or in a liberal environment, to have these kind of sit-ins and these kind of just staged silent protests. So I love this image because it's just that reminder that just sitting down and not moving can be such a powerful statement. And then also that image of the people with their mouths covered, like how scary it is to lose that ability to speak up and communicate. And so this image to me just every time is kind of what I hold in my mind as the reminder of the importance of speaking up and the power that can be had in the different ways we stand up and we protest and we push back when things are going wrong. And I think you'll see some of that illustrated as we get into these specific types of ways to break halos. So the first one, breaking complacency. Can take a moment to enjoy the comic. I don't know if anyone else is the Heart and Brain or Awkward Yeti fans. It's a ongoing comic strip that I'm a huge fan of. I think it's online. And the characters are, among others, the heart and the brain. And you can see in this comic strip, the brain is like, let's keep going, let's stop. Like, we're exercising, this is good, this is bad. Like that kind of conflicting back and forth. And the reason I choose this is because it really illustrates a very simple truth about our brains. Our brains like to take shortcuts. Our brains do not want to work hard. Our brains are kind of lazy. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to the brain, but it's because without the brain, we don't survive. Our brain has to constantly be in motion, constantly processing, constantly working to keep us alive. So of course, with that constant movement, your brain wants shortcuts. It wants to do things easier because otherwise it's working full steam the whole time. It needs more energy. It's going to need more rest. It's exhausting. So that's where a lot of complacency comes from. It's us against our brains. Our brains are trying to make things easier, to establish patterns, to get into like auto flow and not have to think about things anymore. And we, as critical thinking beings, don't want our brains to do that. Think about any time you've driven with someone and you get through a stretch of road and you don't remember it at all. Like you're driving home and you go, wow, I just drove on autopilot. I don't remember that drive at all. Or you're with someone who makes that comment and you're like, what? I was here the whole time in the car. Like, what do you mean you don't know what just happened? So it happens all the time. And you need to be aware that it happens all the time so you can be aware enough to start trying to push back and to take control. So some of the very simple tools that come in terms of how to break these complacence shortcuts, how to break this, is things like reminders, checklists, or using partner checks. So reminders, it can be as simple as a visual reminder, like writing a sticky note somewhere, or I know some people who talk about putting on a certain piece of clothing or jewelry or something when they go to different environments, because it's like, oh, I only wear this watch when I'm giving presentations, so it reminds me that all eyes are on me and I need to be focused. Or I only wear this bandana when I go hiking, because when I have this bandana on, it feels different. And I remember, oh yeah, like I'm out of my comfort zone. Do I have all my gear with me? Did I remember to like bring my car keys? You know, whatever it's reminding them of, it's something tangible that's trying to break that complacency and say, this is different, pay attention. Other reminders are on your cell phone or on a computer. You can set a reminder to break the monotony, to pop up and say like, hey, whatever message you need to be reminded of, like, here it is. Because otherwise time can just fly by. You can get into routine and forget. So reminders are very valuable tools for interrupting that kind of brain complacent blah state we can get into. Checklists, there are books and articles on the values of checklists. I know people who have laminated small checklists of the 10 essentials they keep in like the brain of their backpack, and they'll pull it out and make sure every time they pack for a trip that they've hit every single one. I know I have it, I printed out the 10 essentials and I posted it in my gear area, and I'll go in there and I'll be packing for a trip and I'm like, okay, and I'll glance at it and just go through like, what exactly did I grab from each of those? And I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, I forgot something. Like, I think I grabbed it because I always grab it. Well, this is the one time I actually didn't. And it wasn't until I was listing through everything that I went, oh, I always have my knife in my pocket, but I took it out because of XYZ. I need to go find my knife because that's something I want to take. So reminders, checklists, and then partner checks, it's kind of those same tools, but getting a partner involved. And for those who are involved in climbing, this is something that gets taught to you, to do the partner check, to literally check your partner's harness and rope setup before you climb with them, because the consequences are so high. If you forgot something, or your partner forgot something, if you forgot to tie a knot in the rope, if you forgot to do the double back on the loop, if you forgot a certain piece of gear, this has consequences that can be very life-altering, especially in climbing. So that's where the partner check is taught. And I think partner checks should happen all the time. If you go for a hike, you should have a partner check. Ask each other, do you have each essential? If you're planning a trip, partner check. Hey, did we both check the weather? Did we both look at the map? Do we both know what we need to know? Partner checks should happen anytime we do anything with risk, especially in the outdoors. And it's good to have that partner that you trust, that you know is going to call you out if they see you getting complacent, because no one wants a partner who's just going to smile and nod and not tell you that you're doing something wrong. You want a partner who's going to be like, no, I see a problem. We need to stop and fix this. So there's some examples of how you can break complacency. I hope you've thought of some other things you can do or who you've seen done, because it's one of the most difficult ones. Is it's always going to be us against our brains. And we have to be thinking all the time about how to get the better of our brains and how to outsmart our brains, and maybe even how to work with our brains. Like, hey, we can get complacent here, but we're not going to get complacent here. Breaking assumptions. There's a block of text on the screen. I assume you're reading it right now, but I'll read it out loud too, because that seems like what one does. It says, to counteract assumptions, we must be vulnerable to ourselves and be willing to look beyond how we think we are or who we wish to be. It's kind of a fancy way of saying that assumptions, as the saying goes, make an ass out of you and me. To assume makes an ass out of you and me. If you haven't heard that, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. The point is, when we make an assumption, when we assume, we shortcut, we bypass, we jump from point A to the end, and we kind of miss all the data and the information in between. And often that makes us look bad or has worse consequences. Now, the ugly truth about assumptions is that to counteract that, we have to be vulnerable. We have to be willing to make a mistake, to look stupid, to realize that I've made an ass of myself. And something that I'm glad there's more conversation about nowadays. If you're familiar with the author and public speaker, Brene Brown, she writes about this and talks about this all the time. I highly recommend her work, very good. Just in general though, it's important to know that being vulnerable to saying, I think I made a mistake, or I don't have that information, or why am I thinking this way? It's hard, but you get through it. Vulnerability of that kind, that questioning, that critical thinking, that challenging assumptions, that isn't going to kill you. The far end of that assumption, where you assumed that you were actually ready to go on this trip, where you assumed that your partner was at the skill level they told you that you were at, when you assumed you knew why the leader chose this route, when you assumed that the leader was even following the right trail, that you blindly followed them off the edge, those assumptions can have very dire consequences. So you have to be willing to not only say, can we talk about this, but also ask yourself, can I stop and think about this? Can I look at where I might be thinking about this wrong? And that can hurt, because how we think we are, or how we wish we could be, or how we portray ourselves can be really important. As someone was saying earlier when we shared about your badges become your identity. I mean, that's so true. How many people describe what they do as like, I'm a programmer, or I'm a medic, or I'm a ski patroller? That thing that I do as a hobby or to pay my bills becomes part of my identity. So think about the level of vulnerability it takes to say, I am Katja, I do ski patrol, and I don't actually know how to bandage that or how to splint that because I haven't practiced it in a long time. I'm putting my very identity as a ski patroller on the line by admitting that. But the truth is, it actually makes me a better, stronger person and opens the door for me to improve myself and have better relationships with people, better skills and performance. If I take that moment to say, okay, I wish I looked this way, or I would prefer to be looked at as all knowing and all doing, but I'm going to take a moment, take a breath, and be vulnerable and say, I forgot, or I'm not able to. Help me to be better. Help me to be who I want myself to be, not who I'm pretending I am or prefer to think of myself as, but it's maybe not accurate. So breaking assumptions, that's just, I think, my biggest plug, is that vulnerability is so important. But assumptions and complacency, very related. It's shortcuts, it's getting to conclusions without doing the work. All the skills we talked about for complacency, and now looking at vulnerability, hopefully all these can come into play in kind of breaking down some of these barriers and these problems. One thing we can do is empower communication. So this is something that I usually hype on the leaders to do, but because, as I said earlier with the leader halo, all of us can find ourselves in positions of leadership. All of us can find ourselves being looked to by others or being in the front of that line. This is something we all need to think about, is how do we empower others to speak up? So here's just a couple steps that I've used before, and I know others have used before. And it's kind of very simple formula that may or may not sound familiar, but let's look at it. So first is stop and think. Why do I say this? Because anyone who's had a communication breakdown, especially with someone they care about or are close to or related to, knows that when you get in a communication problem, emotions go up and thinking goes down. You get in shouting matches, you get really upset, things get said that shouldn't be said. Like, this is a human thing. We do not always communicate well. And usually it's because, like I just said, we're going from a very emotional reactive level, and our cognitive, calm, rational level is going down. So by stopping and thinking, what I'm really saying is stop that emotional response, take some breaths, whatever you got to do to calm down, and get out of that reactive state into the thinking state, because you cannot fix problems, especially communication problems, if you don't reverse that flow, if you don't bring down the feeling and bring up the thinking. So first, find a way to do that. Usually stop, time out, take a breath, count to 10, whatever your tool is. Well, okay, we're there. Now what? Now check those assumptions. Get vulnerable. Where did I make a mistake? Where did the group make a mistake? Where did we operate under something that wasn't entirely true? Did we make a mistake early on? Are we making a mistake now? Did we not think through something right? Like, what's happening here? And then empower each other, the group, the leader, have that conversation. If you try and bring something up with the leader and the leader tries to shut you down, okay. Is it because this is a life or death situation where I really have to do what they say to get through it? Or is it because that leader just doesn't want to hear it from me, and maybe I should go to someone else and be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing or thinking, what do you think? And kind of get that second opinion or that group consensus. Going back to that first image of the students sitting on the campus for the sit-in for the protest, if one person sat there, it's easy to walk around them. But if you go to your group, if you go to the others, if you talk to everyone else and get a conversation going, you empower everyone to have opinions, to get vulnerable, to speak up, suddenly it's much more impactful. And then finally, own your mistakes. If you're the one who is guilty of the assumption or the complacency and you made a mistake, whether or not you're allergic to saying I'm sorry, which I've heard some people are, if you can't actually get those words out, if you can't say I'm sorry, I messed up, find some other way to own it. Hey, I may not have looked at the map closely enough. Hey, I think I missed a turn back there. Whatever, just put into words that there was an error, there was a mistake, and it needs to be corrected. I don't care if you can't handle saying I'm sorry or admitting you made a mistake, because whatever you're dealing with doesn't allow you to do that. What I care about is the information. So hash it out later, who has ownership, who is mea culpa, who owes the beers to the group afterwards. But in the moment, point out the mistake and be prepared to talk it through. I can't tell you how many times I've been somewhere or doing something and gone, oh, I was supposed to do that and I totally spaced. Or you weren't paying attention to where we were going. I wasn't paying attention to where we were going. Do we actually know where we are right now? It's that simple, but it's something we miss all the time. Sometimes we try and solve problems without actually verbalizing what the problem is, and that gets us nowhere. So whether it's you're in a leadership position and you can kind of guide people through these steps, or you're in the receiving end of it and you're noticing things going wrong and you maybe think about these, like, how do I encourage this group to stop and think? How do I encourage people to check their assumptions? It's something you need to think about, especially if you're not the leader, because people can get into a flow, people can make mistakes, and sometimes it's up to the little guy, the short voice, the person who's less experienced. I don't know why I said short voice, I was thinking quiet voice, I'm sorry. It's up to that person, that one voice that wouldn't usually speak up. That's sometimes the person that can bring the whole group to a stop and get that conversation to happen. So it's good to be familiar with these steps or some version thereof, but the main point is get the emotions down, get the thinking up, have a conversation, and look at what the mistake is so we can get through it. And then finally, standing your ground. Something that I have now been preaching very firmly since I've started doing this presentation is people need to know how to stand their ground. Whether it's in that beginning image, you're going to sit down and stage your protest, or it's something else, we need to think about it beforehand. So here's an example. This is me on one of my early climbs. I'm rappelling down, I think, for those who are curious, I think this is Pinto down towards Mount St. Helens. And they set up the rappel, the leaders did, and then they gave me and the other newbie instructions, like, here's how you go down. So we start rappelling. And the image of a rappel is so powerful for me because you're really having to put your faith into what other people are telling you to do. And if you think about what a lot of us are taught in the climbing world, in outdoor world, in safety world, in airports, we're all taught see something, say something. I'm sure all of you have heard that at least once. If you see something, say something. So in this case, getting on a rope and rappelling down, if I see something is wrong, if I see like the rope doesn't look right, if I see a fray, if I saw something, someone step on the rope, if I see that the rock doesn't look right, if I see that, I know it's ingrained in me that I need to speak up. I need to say something. I need to point out what I saw, and we need to figure out, what's the next step. But what I've learned over the years is we don't really talk about what happens after that. We talk about the see something, we talk about the say something, but what if that's not enough? What if I see something and I say something and the leader dismisses my concern? What if I see something and say something, but my partner dismisses it and says, you're not actually worried about that, are you? Or plays it down. You need to think about beforehand what your next steps are, what you're willing to do, what lengths you're going to go to if you truly believe that you've seen something and it's not being addressed. So an example of this climb, let's say that this rappel was set up and it's time for me to go and I see something and I'm like, hey, this doesn't look right. And I'm told, don't worry about it, keep going. Okay, now what do I do? In that moment, am I going to just go along with what they told me, even though my gut tells me something's wrong? Probably not, I hope, because that could cost me my life if I really did see something. So what are my options? Okay, let's think about this. I could stomp my feet and yell and scream and get their attention until they finally listen to me and we have a better discussion about it. Whether I'm right or wrong, okay, I might not be very popular after this, but at least I feel like I've truly been listened to. That's an option. What else can I do? I can refuse to go down. I can say, is there an alternate climbing route? Can you go first and show me that this is safe? Is there a way to make this safer? I can ask for alternatives. Great. Some of those alternatives might not be possible, but I can take a moment to stop and think and look around and say, what are the alternatives to this? What other choices do I have? Can I down climb without rappelling? Can I hike back out without going this direction? Is there a different place to go? Again, might have consequences. I might not be very popular. We might lose a lot of valuable time. It might change the dynamics of the trip. But again, if it's something that I feel really strongly about, I need to be able to follow through with that. The final level of this is if there are no alternatives, if this is the only way down and it is only on this rope, I can sit there and say, see you later. I'm going to sit here. You can all go down and send search and rescue back for me. Or I'm going to pull out my little inReach and hit the emergency button. Or I'm just going to sit here until the next group comes and then maybe talk to them about it. Each thing I just described to you has a consequence. Search and rescue might not be very happy if they hear what happened, or they might come and get me and no one ever wants to take me out again because they were so embarrassed that search and rescue had to come get me. Or maybe by sitting up there, I put my group in danger because the weather's changing or a storm's coming and now we all have to sleep up there because they won't leave me behind and we might get hypothermic and talk about a gear halo. Did I bring the right gear with me to spend the night on top of a mountain that I wasn't planning on? These are all options. And we can laugh about it and joke about it and think through what the different options are with a smile on our face. But the point is, you need to know that you have every single option I just listed. You have to think beforehand what levels you're willing to get to, have you prepared for the absolute worst case scenario, and to know that you have the right to stand your ground and to not move. At least in the state of Washington, people cannot legally put their hands on you without your consent. That is called assault. Look up if you go somewhere else, like look into the laws specifically. I guarantee there's some level of people cannot grab you and force you to go down that rope, to follow that trail, to get in that boat, to get in that car. They cannot do it. Now, if it's like you're about to get hit by a falling rock and they save your life, you can have that discussion afterwards. But most cases in that moment, they can't force you. So you have the right to stand your ground. Just be aware you'll have to deal with some level of outcome or consequence from it, but know that you have the right and you can execute that right, especially if you're in a situation where the outcome might be fatality, injury, loss of life, loss of property, loss of something very serious or meaningful, whatever it is. If there's high risk, you have the right to stand your ground and say no. So no longer is it okay to just stop at see something, say something. It's see something, say something, keep saying something, say something more, do something else, ask for alternatives, sit your ground, don't even go, get rescued. Just the point is there's more to it than that. And we all need to think about that and talk about it and be prepared for the worst because there's more to it than just saying something. So concluding all of that, what was the whole point of this evening? It was to talk about that we all need to be able to recognize halos. We need to see where these assumptions, these bits of complacency, these mistakes, these thinking errors, where these things can happen. And I hope at the end of this, you've realized they can happen anywhere, on our gear, on ourselves, on others, on trails, on maps, on things on your wall, on your vehicle, on your technology. Halos are everywhere. And whether you remember the specific names that I've given you of them or not, you know that there's a halo, you know it can appear. That's what you need to know. And then the second part is we need to be able to break those halos because those halos can have very real, very strong consequences. And when you get to the point where something has gone completely wrong, I open this with an image of an article on a rappel anchor failure on a rock. If you get to the point where that rope has failed and someone has died as a result, I guarantee leading up to it, there were halos along the way. There may have been halos over the decisions made that day. There may be halos about the gear. There may be halos about any part of the situation. But I almost any time can guarantee you, if you look closely, you'll see there were halos along the way that if someone had spoken up or someone had noticed or someone had called a timeout and gotten out of those emotions and had that conversation, they may have noticed something they hadn't seen before. They may have been able to break that halo and the outcome could be very different. So that is the call to action, the purpose of all of this is to do a better job recognizing halos, talking about them, and learning how to deal with them, because they will always be there. And it's up to us to notice that and to respond. So just to have a final plug as the situation, as the presentation wraps up. So there is a website, and I can see if I'm able to share it really quick. I'll show you what's on there, but breakeveryhalo.com. I have a publicly accessible slide deck. I invite people to teach others about halos, to review the halos on that website too. And I'll see if I can email everyone afterwards a copy. I have a list of critical thinking questions that go with each of these halos, so you can kind of rehearse and practice and dig deeper. There's also some background information on some of the things I talked about, like that climbing accident. And I'll mention part of why I do this. This picture is me and my best friend climbing partner, Steven. Steven is the person who died in that climbing accident that I had at the very beginning. And to this day, I look back and I wonder if Steven's death could have been avoided if he and I had known about halos, if we had talked about halos, if my class had talked about halos, if our friends had talked about halos, if other senior climbers had talked about halos. I to this day wonder if he would still be here and I wouldn't have to be teaching this. So it's in his honor that I do this, and in his honor, there's also a nonprofit we established. You're welcome to explore that. I'm not going to get into that tonight because this is more about us and our community and the Mountaineers, but that is additional information for those who are interested.